Hey everybody, welcome to the next installment of Journey Through John. Today we're diving into chapter 6, and it starts off with Jesus feeding the 5,000, which really sets the stage for a whole lot of other things that Jesus is going to dive into as we go through this chapter. Just a reminder, bite-sized chunks of scripture and bite-sized conversation about that. Having said that, let's jump into John chapter 6. And it says this, starting at verse 1, we're going to go verse 1 through 15 today. And it says this: After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs. They're following the signs that he was doing on the sick. Verse 3, Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, remember that's the celebration the Hebrew people had because they were when they left Egypt. The Passover is when they put the blood of the lamb on a doorpost, and the angel passed over their door and went to the next. And that's how they were freed from Egypt, because of the death of the firstborn. That's why they celebrated that, the Passover. Verse 4, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. He knew what was going to happen. The others did not. Verse 7, Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough to feed each of them to get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but there are so many. I wonder why he even brought it up. There's 5,000, they're saying 5,000 just the men. So there's probably roughly 10,000, 12,000 people here. And he brings up that the fact that this one boy has a little bit of bread and fish. Verse 10, sorry. Jesus said, have the people sit down. Okay, what are you going to do here? Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves. When he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with fragments from 5 barley loaves. 12 baskets from 5 barley loaves, and left by those who had eaten. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this indeed the prophet who has come. This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. That's the proof they wanted. That they wanted, this guy fed us. Therefore, this must be the one. And so verse 15, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. They wanted to make him king because he had done some signs with healing people, and now he's fed us. Therefore, he must be the prophet. He must be the Messiah. How interesting is that? I think that as we go through this, there's so many questions. He knew what he was doing, and yet he asked Philip, what do you think we should do? And then Andrew comes up and says, well, we have 5 barley loaves and a couple of fish. Will that work? I mean, no one's going to get much. But he'd at least point out that there's some resource. And I think if you couple this with what we see God speaking to Moses when Moses was supposed to, talking about the Passover, when Moses was supposed to go and lead Israel out of Egypt, Moses was like, I can't do this. And what God told him was like, well, what do you have in your hand? And he said, I have a staff. And it's interesting, God said, that's enough. And so Moses threw it on the ground, turned into a serpent. And we can look at it, it was used in that way. But it's also the idea that when Moses was up with his back against the sea, the Red Sea at that time, and the Egyptians were coming after the Israelites after the Passover, what we see Moses doing and what God told Moses to do is to raise the staff, and all of a sudden the Red Sea parted. And here we almost see Andrew coming up and say, I have a staff, so to speak. I have a couple of pieces of bread and some fish. And Jesus is like, that is enough. So there's a couple of things I want to point out to kind of wrap this up and maybe enter into our time of prayer. The first thing is that piece. Let's talk about that piece first. You may feel ill-equipped or overwhelmed by whatever you feel God wanting you to do. But whatever that is, if God has called you to it, God will fulfill it and empower you to carry that out. That's an important thing to remember as believers. Oftentimes, I think we talk ourselves out of things like that. The second piece of this is, when we look at the people and that they were willing to make him king for some bread and some signs, all they really wanted was for someone just to give them what they wanted, or give them even what they needed in that moment. And they were willing to say, that's who he is. And I think it's so easy for us in our current situation, our current culture, to say, he should bless me. And if I'm blessed, that means that God's happy with me, right? And it's a similar idea, instead of saying, because they missed the point. They missed the point of who he was there. They didn't need fed, they needed their sins removed. That was the bigger issue, but they missed that, and they wanted to make him king for bread as opposed to one who would remove their sins. For us, I can get concerned sometimes that we want Jesus for the blessing, but not because he is the king who's set us free from sin, and we have his spirit in us, and our job is to go and not just be fed, but also to take what we've experienced and extend it to the world. So those are a couple challenges today. Hopefully, as we dive into this deeper, you'll see that this is going to open up to even more, and we'll see things in there. For example, he had him gather all the fragments so that nothing may be lost. We're going to jump into this a little bit more. I hope you're looking forward to it as we continue to journey through John.